Hello, friends, and welcome to the show. So, there's even more chaos happening at the Texas Mexico border. Let's get started. The CDC lets child migrant shelters fill to 100% despite COVID concern. The fact that the country's premier health advisory agency is permitting a change in COVID 19 protocols indicate the scale of the immigration crisis. A draft memo obtained by Axios conceded facilities should plan for and expect to have COVID 19 cases. The document goes on to recommend detailed ways to prevent the spread of coronavirus in shelters. The memo, drafted on CDC letterhead and set for imminent delivery, said the only available options for housing minors who cross the border without their parents are prolonged stays at Customs and Border Patrol facilities operating significantly above COVID 19 capacities. And this is important to note because we were told that those kids should only be in those facilities for 72 hours, and now it seems that they should be in there for an indefinite amount of time. And that's quite concerning because that's not supposed to happen. So we need to have these blue anon news organizations to basically do their job. Stop suckling at the teat of Joe Biden and everybody in the White House and do your darn job, because what's happening at the border is just disgusting. And the fact that kids are being treated this way, that families are being basically separated, although they're saying, oh, we're not separating families at the border. Like I said in previous videos, when families know that kids aren't being turned away, but families are, guess what's going to happen? These families are going to say it's going to be better for this kid to be by themselves in America than it is for them to be stuck in the middle of a desert or stuck in basically a refugee camp on the border. So they're going to send their kid by themselves across the border to stay in these facilities. So whether they like it or not, the Biden administration is incentivizing basically separating children from their families. The other alternative is increasing capacity at other shelters run by DHS above what their coronavirus protocols allow. The CDC says there's an assumed risk of migrant kids getting the virus at Border Patrol centers, and it alludes to other safety concerns with those facilities. It concludes the HHS shelters are the safer option, even with increased capacity. The CDC says these facilities, operated by HHS's Office of Refugee Resettlement, may temporarily increase capacity to full licensed capacity while implementing and adhering to strict COVID 19 mitigation measures. You can't do both at the same time. That is mutually exclusive. You can't implement and adhere to strict COVID 19 mitigation measures and increase capacity to full license capacity. If COVID 19 mitigation measures say you can only be at 50% capacity, you can't go to full license capacity while implementing and adhering to strict COVID 19 mitigation. It doesn't make any sense. It's one or the other. So if they're willing to break that one COVID 19 mitigation measure, what else are they willing to break? And I'll show you in a later article where they're not even COVID 19 testing people that they're releasing into the United States. The memo also spells out the dire program or problem. As Axios has reported, shelters have been getting an average of 321 children per day, up from 47 per day the first week of January, and expect to need 20,000 beds to accommodate an anticipated record number of child migrants. So, like I said, so you have families coming to the US, and then they hear that basically the entire family can't come into the United States, only children can. So what do? The parents stay in Mexico and they send their kid across the border by themselves. The kid says, my family died in the desert, and then they stay in America. So even when they're staying in these camps, it's better conditions than some refugee camp on the border in Mexico. At this time, CBP does not have an adequate space for physical distancing, quarantine of persons exposed to COVID 19, or isolation of ill or infected persons, the memo says. So they don't even have a place to put sick people. So I guess they want all these immigrant children to get COVID, I guess. I understand that children are not a main vector of transmission for COVID 19, but I'm using these blue anon conspiracy theories against the people who peddle blue anon conspiracy theories. If they're going to say, well, schools can't be reopened because of COVID 19, then why can these facilities be held at 100% capacity? And not just that, they don't have adequate space for physical distancing or a place to quarantine people exposed to COVID 19. It just doesn't make any sense. As of March 1st, 2021, 4 CBP sectors are over COVID adjusted capacity. The memo also comes amid a ferocious national debate over whether and when to reopen schools. While it states in its opening paragraph that children have been less affected by the coronavirus than adults, the memo makes clear its recommendations are only in response to rising number of migrant children and don't apply to other group settings. The memo was drafted in a response to requests for guidelines from the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Let's jump over to that article. Leaked HHS docs spotlight Biden's child migrant dilemma. And so basically, the same documents dated Tuesday say the shelter system is a 94% occupancy and expected to reach its maximum this month. So basically, they're talking about the influx of unaccompanied minors is a mushrooming problem for the new president and his policy and social welfare agencies. A trip is not finalized, and the White House continues to work on locking in details and logistics for a potential visit. They actually visited there over the course of the weekend. Spokesperson for DHS and HHS did not immediately respond to a request for comment. HHS has already moved to open overflow shelters and increase the speed with which it releases children to caretakers already within the U.S. The big picture, though. This week, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas insisted the current situation is not yet a crisis. Regardless, it's a clear number of children crossing the U.S Mexico border could fast overwhelm government systems in ways similar to the crisis in 2014 and 2019. The uptick comes while the administration continues to use an emergency public health order to quickly deport migrant adults and some families, including asylum seekers. At the same time, Biden has reversed a Trump administration policy of using the public health order to quickly turn away unaccompanied children. The source who provided the internal Biden administration documents expects to see family migration rise over the next months as well. So this is bananas, right? So why is it okay for these facilities to run so high with children, but you can't open your schools, right? You can't have it both ways. You're going to have basically, you already see Americans being extremely frustrated, and it's actually quite bipartisan. You see this recall effort happening in California. Now you see people wanting to recall Andrew Cuomo in New York for basically killing grandma. And I think the media is trying to put a spotlight on Andrew Cuomo being creepy towards women to basically divert focus away from the fact that he killed grandma. Because if that gains traction and he loses his office because he killed grandma, then all these other Democrat governors throughout the country could also face the same repercussions from having adopted the same policy for having killed grandma, from putting COVID positive patients into nursing homes. So I think that's why basically the CNN, New York Times, Washington Post are all focusing on sexual harassment allegations as opposed to him trying to cover up the fact that he suppressed 15,000 deaths, basically that he was solely responsible for. Hot air ticket to ride. Greyhound CEO demands DHS provide COVID-19 negative test results for illegal migrants. Greyhound's president and CEO, David Leach, wrote to Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. He told the secretary that when the Department of Homeland Security goes to put an illegal immigrant on a Greyhound bus, he expects the agency to have proof of a COVID-19 negative test result. This is not an unreasonable demand. When illegal migrants are detained by Border Patrol agents, they become the responsibility of DHS. There is a surge of activity at the border now, thanks to Joe Biden's executive action since taking office. Mexicans and Central Americans take him at his word that he will open Americans' borders, and those entering illegally will receive no more than a slap on the wrist, if that. Migrants are released into border towns, dropped off at bus stops, and sent on their merry way further into the country. So here's some quotes from the CEO from Greyhound. We need assurance that any detainees released by ICE have proof of a negative COVID-19 test, similar to the proof required for international airline passengers who arrive at the U.S. ports of entry. Leach's letter continued. Greyhound already asks our customers to stay at home and not travel if they are not feeling well or have been diagnosed with COVID. However, migrants simply do not have that choice unless the government or their sponsors have them or house them while they're in quarantine. Therefore, it is critical to public safety that ICE provide 100% assurance that no one released that can be reasonably expected to ride a Greyhound bus be infected with COVID-19 or mixed with other potential passengers that have tested negative. Sorry, that text in that quote's really small. I'm having a hard time reading that. We simply do not have buses and drivers ready to meet surges in demand without emergency funding. In order to properly serve immigrants coming into the southern border and traveling to their sponsored destination, Greyhound will be operating one-way moves throughout the country, and in order to get the resources back, buses and drivers, to the border to continue operations. Greyhound needs funding assistance to cover the cost of repositioning buses and drivers from other parts of the country to wherever they may be needed. So he brings up a couple good points. And what's most concerning is that these people aren't being tested, and they're basically being put onto buses, and then they're being sent further into the country, which is only going to spread COVID-19. And if it's as big of a threat as people make it sound, then people should really be concerned about it. But it's only a problem if an American has COVID-19, but it's not a problem. You're xenophobic if you're concerned about an illegal immigrant having COVID-19. But you're patriotic if you're concerned of an American having COVID-19. It doesn't make any sense at all. Greyhound passengers, migrants or not, should have a reasonable expectation of not sitting next to a COVID-19 positive passenger. Bus drivers should not have to worry if their trip will become a super spreader event. This is a public health issue. Recently, a City of Brownsville spokesperson said that 108 migrants have tested positive for the virus since January 25th. Border security is a federal responsibility. It is not at all unreasonable for Greyhound to expect federal funding in order to provide the services being requested of their company. The same goes for proof of negative test results. Governor Abbott released a statement on social media. My statement about the Biden administration assimilating COVID-positive illegal immigrants in states across the country. The unconscionable act by the Biden administration of releasing COVID-positive illegal immigrants in our state puts the lives of Texans and Americans at risk. Border security is strictly a federal responsibility. The federal government alone has the responsibility to test, screen, and quarantine illegal immigrants crossing our border who may have COVID. Instead of doing their job, the Biden administration suggested it did not have the sufficient resources and, remarkably, asked Texas to assist them in aiding their illegal immigration program. Texas refused. We will not aid a program that makes our country a magnet for illegal immigration. If Biden is serious about ending the coronavirus pandemic, he'll find the cojones to not do what works at the border, not bend over for the radical open borders crowd, or take the anal swabs from China, I suppose. Common sense tells us that allowing COVID-19 positive illegal migrants to travel across the country is not a wise decision. When Obama was putting them on buses in 2014 or Trump in 2019, there was not a highly contagious pandemic to worry about. Greyhound is willing to provide transportation and should be given assurances of safety precautions for its passengers and bus drivers. So there's a couple things to unpack here. Joe Biden should be serious about ending the coronavirus pandemic. And by being serious about it, he needs to be testing people coming into the country. He already does it for airfare. It shouldn't be an issue doing it with illegal immigration. It's not something that should be considered xenophobic or racist because we do it for everybody coming from every country in the world. So why should people illegally crossing the border in Mexico be any different than if you were flying from Mexico City into, say, San Antonio or Houston or Dallas? Why should that policy be any different than you basically crossing the border illegally? It should be the same. DHS or ICE agents, whoever's there on the border who apprehends that illegal migrant should basically do a COVID-19 rapid test. If you basically test positive, then they need to find a way to quarantine you for your 2 weeks as needed. That just makes sense. You shouldn't be put on a bus, potentially infect everybody on said bus while you're because people don't realize how big Texas is. Say you're on a bus ride from El Paso to San Antonio. That's like a 6 to 8 hour bus ride. So you're there for 6 to 8 hours breathing on people on a bus. It doesn't have the same filtration systems as an airplane does. And so you could potentially infect everybody on that bus on your way to San Antonio. And then everybody on that bus could potentially infect a bunch of people in San Antonio. And San Antonio, there's a 40 to 50% basically comorbidity risk for COVID-19 because people in San Antonio, there's a lot of individuals with heart problems, pre-diabetes, diabetes, being obese, you name it. And it is really a concern. And it's not just, it, it's just this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The policy of unadulterated tolerance is just disgusting. And it's only going to negatively affect Americans at the end of the day. We need we need strong policies. We need a strong leader. If Joe Biden's incapable of providing strong leadership, then we need to find somebody. Then Kamala Harris needs to provide that strong leadership, or somebody else in the Biden administration needs to provide some sort of leadership, saying that there's not a crisis at the border when basically DHS is saying, hey, look, we're going to be running out of capacity when you have these childcare facilities that are being basically overran with children because there's so many coming unaccompanied across the border due to Joe Biden's policies. This is a new thing, and they try to blame it on Trump. Trump didn't end Trump's policies. Biden ended Trump's policies. And as soon as Biden ended those policies, that's when these crises began to happen. So it's not Trump's fault. It's Biden's fault. He needs to own that. People in the Biden administration need to own that. And lastly, Texas forced to do the job that Joe Biden refuses to do. Greg Abbott tweets, today, Texas launched Operation Lone Star to respond to the border crisis. It deploys National Guard plus DPS officers plus air, ground, marine, and tactical border security assets to deny Mexican cartels and smugglers the ability to move drugs and people into Texas. So, where the federal government fails to do its job, Texas shall do it for them. And that is disgusting. Why should a state have to protect the sovereignty of the United States? Texas, by protecting its own sovereignty, is doing the United States' job for them. Joe Biden is a weak president. These basically cartels and coyotes and smugglers are taking advantage of that. So now Greg Abbott's going to have to do Joe Biden's job for him. And unfortunately, it's going to be seen as xenophobic and racist and all these isms and ists and all this stuff. And and it's crazy because in 2021, by doing the right thing, by following the letter of the law, you are somehow un-American. And that's, I guess that's where we're at in 2021. And hopefully that changes, because you can't have a country where by protecting your borders, by basically defending the law, by being in the military and supporting and defending the Constitution from all enemies, both foreign and domestic, you are seen as a threat to America. You can't have a country that way. So hopefully this changes. Hopefully the culture starts shifting back to the center, at least. It doesn't even have to shift to the right, but the Overton window is so far to the left to where even if you're just moderate and you're like, hey, maybe, I have a yard and I have a fence, so maybe you shouldn't jump my fence and break into my yard. That's seen as extremism. That's seen as right-wing extremism, and it shouldn't be seen that way. The United States is a sovereign country, and we should be treated as such, and we should have a president who thinks as such. So that's going to be it for now, unless the United States starts burning to the ground due to what's happening with the George Floyd trial. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Have a good one.